Today's story is about a guy who did everything right. He saved up, he waited, he picked a spot that actually meant something, got down on one knee and asked the woman he'd spent 4 years with to marry him. She said no. So he gave it another year, planned something even bigger, roses, candles, friends involved, the whole setup, and asked again. She said no again. The second she realized he was genuinely walking out the door, she said yes. He left anyway. Get comfortable. This one's going to get under your skin. I proposed twice. She said, not now. After the second rejection, I finally said, then we're done. She didn't expect what happened next. Nadia and I met at a party neither of us wanted to be at. Our friends basically guilted us both into showing up. Her crew dragged her there and mine dragged me. And if you'd told either of us walking in that night that we'd spend the next 4 years together, we both would have laughed. I was standing near the back with a soda, half plotting my exit, when she walked over and started quietly making fun of the music. Not to the room, just to me, like we already had some unspoken agreement about the playlist. We talked the whole night. Just easy stuff. Bad movies we'd both seen. Weird things that happened in our childhoods. Places we'd visited that didn't live up to the hype. She had this story about a family vacation that went completely off the rails in the least dramatic, but somehow funniest way possible, and I was genuinely losing it by the time she got to the end of it. By the time people started heading out, I already knew this wasn't a normal conversation. I asked for her number before I left. We made it official a few weeks later. For the first couple of years, the relationship just worked. Nadia was sharp, funny, always in on the joke. She had this way of paying attention in conversation that made you feel like whatever you were saying actually mattered. Not performatively, just genuinely present. She remembered small things. Not just birthdays and anniversaries, but the little stuff. The name of a coworker I'd complained about once. What specifically stressed me out about a project at work. What I'd ordered the first time we went to a particular restaurant. It sounds like nothing written out like that, but that kind of attention adds up over time, and you start to feel actually known by someone rather than just coexisted with. We had overlapping taste in enough things to make weekends easy. Same general approach to movies, same preference for a good night and over going out just to say we went out, same sense of humor that let dumb stuff be funny instead of exhausting. And just enough differences to keep it from going flat. She pushed back on me when she disagreed. Didn't just agree with whatever I said to keep things smooth. I respected that about her. The whole relationship had this low drama quality that I'd learned, watching other people's situations fall apart over the years, was actually harder to find than people think. We had this thing where whenever one of us had a bad week, we'd do this completely dumb tradition we'd made up in year one. Just order the worst food we could find on the delivery app, put on the most objectively terrible movie either of us could locate, and spend the whole night making fun of both. It sounds stupid because it is stupid, but it worked every time without fail. She was good at that kind of thing, making the low points feel manageable without turning it into some big emotional processing session. I've thought about that specific thing more than once since all of this happened, if I'm being honest about it. The day-to-day was just good for a long time. That's the part that makes this harder to explain to people on the outside who want a clear villain. She wasn't a bad person. She wasn't treating me badly. The relationship, for most of those 4 years, was genuinely one of the better things in my life. That context matters, because it's what made the proposal feel like a formality rather than a gamble. And it's also what made the rejection hit so much harder than I expected. Around the 2-year mark, I started actually thinking about the future. Not the vague, yeah, someday we'll probably get married thing couples say, because it's expected. I mean, I was making real mental plans. I started setting money aside for a ring and told myself I'd wait until I felt more financially solid before I did anything about it. That felt like the responsible move. I didn't want to propose and then immediately stress about every expense while she was looking at venues online. She deserved a real proposal with a real plan backing it up, not just the gesture on its own. What made me confident about all of it was that we'd already talked about marriage directly. Not as some abstract future concept, she'd told me more than once that she couldn't imagine being with anyone else, that she wanted to build something real. So when I finally started putting the proposal together after about a year of saving and thinking it through, I genuinely wasn't sweating the outcome. It felt like a formality at that point. A good one, but still. I planned it at the beach where we'd had our first date. Just us, No crowd, no restaurant with strangers watching, no production that felt more like a performance than an actual moment. That first date, we'd both been broke, packed a cheap picnic, sat on the sand, and talked until it got too cold to stay. I wanted to bring it back to that. I made sure the timing lined up with sunset because Nadia had always talked about how much she loved that hour, the sky when it turns all orange and pink. The weather cooperated. One of those evenings where everything looks like something you'd see on a screensaver, and for once it doesn't feel fake. We walked the shore for a bit, just talking about whatever was going on in our lives. I'd been carrying the ring in my jacket all day and kept reminding myself not to force the moment, just let it arrive. When it felt right, I stopped, took her hand, and said what I'd been meaning to say for 2 years. How sure I was. How I didn't want to keep doing the almost thing. Then I got down on one knee and pulled out the ring. She looked at me. For what felt like a full minute, she just looked at me. Then she said, "I want to marry you, just not right now." I stayed on one knee for a beat too long before I stood up. My brain was still trying to process it. "I want to marry you, but not right now." I smiled and said something like, "Yeah, okay, I get it," because I didn't know what else to do, and I wasn't going to make a scene on the beach. She said she wasn't ready for the engagement stuff yet, that she needed more time, that it just wasn't the right moment. She didn't go deeper than that. No timeline, no real explanation, just those words and a look on her face like she genuinely meant it and also knew it wasn't what I was hoping to hear. We spent the rest of that evening pretending everything was fine. It wasn't. The whole drive home, I was going back over every conversation we'd had about marriage, trying to figure out what I'd missed. Was it something about how I asked? The timing? Did I not know her as well as I thought? I didn't ask her any of it because I didn't want to come across like I was pressuring her. I smiled and we had dinner, and I told myself it was fine. Hold on a second. For anyone listening, this is me jumping in, not the OP. I need us all to sit with that phrase for a moment. I want to marry you, but not right now. That is not a rejection. But it's also not a yes. That is a software update that installs for 9 months and never actually finishes. He's on one knee at sunset with a ring, and she basically submitted a pending request. What makes it worse, she'd been telling him for 2 years she couldn't imagine being with anyone else. So either she genuinely meant it and just wasn't ready, or she said everything a person says to keep someone in their corner without intending to follow through on any of it. Both of those are problems. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to Princess Loading Screen. We never talked about it after that night. I kept waiting for her to bring it up. Some conversation a few weeks out where she'd explain what "not right now" actually meant. Was it general fear of commitment? A specific concern about me she hadn't voiced? Some timeline in her head I didn't know about? She never brought it up. And I didn't push because I was trying to respect her pace and not look like I couldn't accept the answer I'd gotten. So we just went back to normal. Trips, weekends with friends, the regular couple routine. On the surface, nothing changed, but it was always there in the background. Every engagement party we went to for someone in our circle, every time some show we were watching did a proposal scene, every time one of our parents asked with that particular tone about when we were planning to get married, I'd feel it again. That same low-grade sting sitting right there under everything. I kept telling myself she just needed more time, that eventually something would click and she'd come to me when she was ready. I genuinely believed that for a while. The relationship itself didn't fall apart. That's the part that made this whole period so hard to name clearly. We weren't fighting more. She wasn't pulling away from me. By almost every external measure, things were fine. But there's a real difference between a relationship that's building towards something and one that's just running on existing momentum. And somewhere around month 6 or 7 of that year, I started to quietly feel which one this actually was. I didn't let myself say that out loud, even to myself. I just kept going, kept explaining it away, kept stacking up reasons why everything was still okay. I remember one night we were at dinner with some friends, and one of the guys had just proposed to his girlfriend the week before. The whole table was talking about it, how he'd planned it, how she'd reacted, all of it. And I watched Nadia's face the whole time. She was smiling, seemed genuinely happy for them. She glanced over at me once during the conversation, and I couldn't read it. Was she thinking about us? Was she uncomfortable? Was it nothing? I didn't ask. I just nodded along and changed the subject after a few minutes. That's where I was that whole year. Reading things, not asking, and filling in the blanks with whatever interpretation kept the peace. I spent too much time in my own head about all of it, which Joel told me more than once. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she just panicked on the beach and said the first thing that came out. Maybe the setting was wrong and a different proposal would land differently. I built a whole collection of explanations for her over that year, and held on to whichever one felt most comforting depending on the day. Looking back, those 12 months are probably the part of this whole story I'm least proud of. Not the proposal, not the breakup. Just those months of convincing myself it was fine when something in the back of my head already knew it wasn't. By the end of that year, I decided to try again. My thinking was, she'd never said she didn't want to marry me, just not yet. So maybe the problem was the setting. Too small, too quiet, maybe she needed something with more weight to it. I decided to go the opposite direction. I booked a botanical garden, one of those places with big stone fountains, rose arches over the walking paths, little lights strung through the hedges at night. Nadia's obsessed with plants. She has about 20 of them crowded onto every available surface in our apartment, including several I've personally killed by forgetting to water them, which she has never fully let go of. I figured if any setting was going to feel right to her, it was that one. Actually, I should back up for a second. I remember I was standing at the kitchen counter eating cereal when I made the online reservation, and right behind me her cat knocked one of the succulents off the windowsill, clean off the edge onto the floor. Third time that month with that specific plant. I just stood there looking at the dirt and thought, okay, sure. Anyway, I got our closest friends involved to help set up before we arrived. The plan was dinner at a nice restaurant nearby first, just us, then a walk over to the garden afterward. She'd have no idea what was coming. Our friends came through, roses down the path, candles, the whole setup. It looked genuinely impressive, better than I'd pictured it. Dinner went smooth. We were both relaxed, laughing, good energy on both sides. I'd spent all day quietly catastrophizing in the back of my head, running through everything that could go sideways, but sitting across from her, it all settled down. She was in a great mood. I was trying to stay present and not give anything away. After we ate, I suggested a walk through the garden. She was in. We got to the fountain, and it was all there exactly like I'd planned it. She grabbed my arm when she saw the setup. I took that as a good sign. I did the speech again. Told her I loved her, that I was sure about this, that I'd been ready for a while and I wanted her to be too. Got down on one knee, pulled out the ring. She said, "Not just yet. Pause. Let me get in here. This is me, not the story." She had roses, candles, a stone fountain. Their closest friends had set the whole thing up, and she still said not yet. That's like someone preparing an incredible meal, plating everything perfectly, lighting the candles, and you saying you're not hungry. But the second they reach for the plate, you grab it and say, "Actually, wait." She basically pulled a full Jack Dawson here, had something real right in front of her, and let it sink. Except Jack had an actual excuse. The man was freezing to death in the North Atlantic. She just had cold feet and a genuine talent for the worst possible timing. I stood up slowly. I asked her why, what was actually stopping her. I kept my voice even, but I wasn't hiding the frustration this time. She was crying, which I hadn't expected. She said the same things she'd said on the beach. She needed more time. She wanted to be sure things would work out. She just wasn't ready. I asked her if there was someone else. Not accusingly, just it genuinely didn't track for me. 4 years in. She shook her head and said no, there was nobody. Then I asked the question I should have asked a year ago on the beach. "Are you sure about me?" She looked at her hands. She didn't say a word. I'd been telling myself for a year that it was about timing, about the pressure of getting engaged, about needing to let her get there on her own terms without feeling pushed. Standing in that garden watching her go completely quiet when I asked if she was sure about me, that was a different thing. That wasn't about timing or settings or the size of the proposal. That was something she didn't know how to say out loud, and the silence was saying it loud enough. We sat down near the fountain, and I asked her to actually help me understand what was happening, because I'd given this everything I had, and I was struggling to figure out what else I was supposed to do. She said she did love me. She said she wanted to be with me. Then she said she just wasn't sure she was ready for the commitment of marriage and didn't want to rush into something she wasn't certain about. That's when it landed clearly. She wasn't uncertain about marriage in the abstract. She was uncertain about me. Those are two completely different conversations, and we'd apparently been having the wrong one for over a year. I sat with that for a moment before I said anything back, because I think part of me had still been holding out hope that she'd say something that made sense of it all. Some explanation that would reframe the whole thing in a way I could work with. But there was nothing there. She was looking at me with real emotion on her face and still couldn't give me an answer to the simplest question I'd asked. Not about the proposal, not about the ring. Just, are you sure about me? And the silence after that question was the most honest thing she'd said all night. I told her I couldn't keep doing this, that after 4 years and 2 real attempts, I wasn't going to sit in a relationship indefinitely waiting for her to decide I was worth committing to. She started crying harder and said, "Fine, I'll marry you. Please don't leave." And I know she meant it in that moment. I genuinely do, but she only said it because she thought I was walking out. That's not a yes. That's damage control with a ring attached to it. I didn't want her to marry me because she was scared of losing me. I wanted her to want it, to be genuinely excited about it, not just willing to agree to stop a loss. Those are two completely different things, and I wasn't going to pretend they weren't. I walked away from the garden. Yo, time out. Let me get this straight. She turned down 2 proposals, went completely silent when asked directly if she was sure about him, and only said yes when he was already walking out the door. And he's the one getting called immature by her entire social circle. That is some gold medal narrative revision right there. I fully expect her friends to launch a podcast called How He Left and Why It's Still Somehow His Fault. And Ashley, the friend who texted, "You were just a safe bet for her," thought that was going to sting him. Ma'am, you just confirmed everything he'd been quietly wondering about for a year and a half. That's not shade. That's a confession with no return address. The next few days were rough in a specific kind of way. I stayed at Joel's place. Joel's one of those guys who doesn't turn things into a moment. He just makes room, hands you a soda, and puts something mindless on TV without asking 20 questions. We played video games most nights, occasionally watched something dumb, and I tried not to let my head go to dark places. It helped more than I expected to just be somewhere that wasn't surrounded by 4 years of accumulated shared life. The first night I was there, I barely slept. Not because I was spiraling exactly, just because my brain wouldn't quiet down. I'd lie there going through the whole timeline, the beach, the year of silence, the garden, and trying to figure out at what point I should have made a different call. I didn't land on one. I think that's how I knew I'd made the right choice. When you've actually screwed something up, you can usually find the exact moment. This one, I kept coming back to the same place. I did what someone does when they love a person and want to build something real with them. The outcome wasn't what I wanted, but the decisions were mine, and I'd make most of them again. Nadia and I weren't talking. She stayed at our apartment, and I didn't go back. Then the texts started rolling in. Not from her at first, but from her friends. Then her parents. Then some of our mutual people who'd clearly gotten her version of events, which from what I could piece together went roughly like, he ended things because I wasn't ready to get married. Technically not wrong. Missing about half the actual picture. I got called selfish, immature. One person sent a long message about how I was throwing away a 4-year relationship over one small thing, apparently unaware we were now 2 occurrences deep, and I'd also just asked her point blank if she was sure about me and gotten dead silence in response. Another person told me I was scared of commitment, which is a remarkable read of the situation, given that I had proposed twice in 13 months. Ashley's message was the most revealing one. You were just a safe bet for her. She'll find someone better now. I didn't respond to that. It sat with me for a day, and then I realized it wasn't designed to hurt me. It was designed to reframe everything in a way that made Nadia the one who'd made a power move, rather than the one who'd fumbled something real. And also, reading between the lines, it was quietly answering a question I'd been circling around for a while without fully wanting to land on it. My own guys were a different conversation entirely. Joel kept it straightforward. She couldn't decide in 4 years, she wasn't going to. Matt was more blunt. He'd thought I should have walked after the beach. Said the first proposal gave me everything I needed to know. He wasn't wrong about that. I just hadn't been in a place to hear it 12 months earlier. I'd wanted to believe she just needed more time, and that if I was patient and didn't push, she'd get there on her own. That's a generous interpretation. I held on to it a lot longer than I should have. The calls from Nadia kept coming. I answered eventually. She wanted to work it out, come home, said she'd been wrong to hesitate. I told her I heard her, but that a yes that arrived the moment she thought she was losing me wasn't the kind I was looking for. We both went quiet on the phone for a minute. Then we said our goodbyes. About 2 weeks after the botanical garden. Wait, no. It was closer to 10 days, actually. I just remember it felt like 2 weeks. Anyway, I got one last text from her. Short. No drama. I understand now. I'm sorry. I hope you find someone who makes you happy. No more calls. No more texts from her friends. Just silence after that. I went back to the apartment when I knew she wouldn't be there. Packed what was mine, left my key on the counter, and walked out. It took about 40 minutes. 4 years down to 40 minutes and a key on a counter. Final update. The first few weeks in my own place were an adjustment. There's no cleaner way to put it. I found a one-bedroom in a decent part of town. Nothing remarkable, just mine. I could leave dishes in the sink because I felt like it. Stayed up too late watching things I'd been wanting to watch for years. Slept in the middle of the bed, which sounds like a small thing until you realize how much of your own physical space you quietly give up during a long relationship without ever really tracking it. What takes longer than people usually talk about is the mental recalibration. When you've spent 4 years with your daily routine, partly organized around another person, their schedule, their preferences, the shape of your evenings because of what she had going on, suddenly having no one else's rhythm to account for feels both good and genuinely disorienting at the same time. I'd catch myself about to say something out loud and then remember I was the only one in the room. Not in a sad way exactly, just jarring for a while. You get used to the texture of another person's presence, and then one day it's just gone, and the quiet feels different than it used to. The question I kept coming back to was what I actually wanted now. Not from a relationship, I wasn't even thinking about that yet. Just from my own life and days. I'd been so focused on the future I thought we were building that I hadn't really looked at what I wanted separate from that plan for a couple of years. I started small, made a list of things I'd been putting off, hit the gym with actual consistency because I had real free time now and needed somewhere to put the energy. Got into a work rhythm that was clean and focused. None of it was groundbreaking, just getting my own footing back under me. Joel checked in regularly. Matt and I started hanging out more than we had in years. The weird moments weren't the obvious emotional ones. You brace for those and they come and go. The ones that caught me off guard were the random quiet ones. Opening the fridge and only thinking about what I felt like for dinner. Driving somewhere with no need to check in. Waking up on a Saturday with a fully empty schedule and nobody to negotiate with about what to fill it with. Those took longer to feel normal than I expected, but they did eventually. The thing about going through something like this is that at a certain point, the processing stops being about the other person and starts being about yourself. Like, what do you actually want? Not just from a relationship, but from your life in general. I'd been so attached to a specific picture of the future that I hadn't really looked at the individual pieces clearly in a while. When I finally did, some of them looked different than I remembered. That part was worth something, even if I could have done without the way I got there. I also stopped explaining it to everyone who asked. That helped more than I expected. For the first month, every time someone asked what happened, I'd give this whole detailed rundown. The beach, the garden, the silence when I asked if she was sure about me. And every time I told it, I'd feel the whole thing again fresh. At some point, I just started saying, "We broke up, it was the right call," and leaving it there. Turns out that's enough of an explanation for most people. And the ones who push for more detail don't actually need it. They're just curious. Cutting those conversations short saved me a lot of energy. A few months in, Joel called and said we needed to get out and do something. Just pool, sodas, catch up, nothing heavy. We hadn't done a proper hangout in a while since work had kept us both busy. I said fine. The night started easy. We shot pool, talked about nothing requiring much thought, just the kind of back and forth that happens naturally with someone you've known long enough that conversation doesn't need effort. I wasn't thinking about anything heavy. And then about an hour in, Joel got this specific look on his face while I was lining up a shot. He said, "Hey, so, Nadia's here." I went still for a second. Then I glanced over as casual as I could. She was at the bar with a guy, leaned toward each other, laughing at something. It looked comfortable. Easy. I stood there with the pool cue in my hand for maybe 3 full seconds, and then looked back at Joel, who was watching me like he had some kind of contingency plan ready to deploy. I shrugged. "Let's keep playing." And I meant it. Seeing her didn't wreck me the way part of me had been quietly bracing for. There was something there. Not jealousy, more like that low, quiet ache that shows up when you recognize that something is genuinely, completely over. Not technically on paper. Actually over. Done. We finished the game. I didn't look back over again. When we called it a night, I went home and sat on the balcony with a soda and just let the whole evening settle over me. It wasn't heavy. I wasn't spiraling, wasn't reconstructing timelines, wasn't asking myself where it went wrong. It was just done. And I was okay. There's a version of this story where that bar scene hits me harder, where I go home and spend the next 3 weeks in my head about it. And honestly, 2 months earlier, I think it would have. The fact that it didn't told me more about where I actually was than anything else had. You don't always get clean closure moments. Usually you just sort of notice one day that you stop needing one. Wait, hold up. I need a second here. Because this man just described building an actual life on his own, figuring out what he wants, coming out the other side of a long relationship without losing his mind. And the whole thing sounds like a net positive, not a tragedy. That's what people watching from the outside miss. They see 4 years ending and call it a waste. He's describing recovery that actually worked. Most guys take 18 months to stop replaying the same arguments in their head. This one got a gym routine, a decent apartment, and a balcony to sit on. I'm not saying it was painless. I'm saying he landed somewhere better than where he was. That part matters. I don't know if Nadia ever figured out what she was actually waiting for. Maybe she did. Maybe the guy at the bar is exactly who she needed, and she'll know right away with him. Maybe she'll still be not quite ready 2 years from now, and he'll find himself somewhere familiar. That's not mine to track anymore. What I know is that I didn't miss anything obvious. I wasn't oblivious to red flags. There weren't any. Not in the traditional sense. She wasn't dishonest. She wasn't pulling away or treating me badly or checking out of the relationship in ways I could point to and say, there it is. She just couldn't answer one question. Are you sure about me? And whatever the reason was for that, fear, uncertainty, something she never let herself say out loud, it was hers to own, not mine to fix. Some people are going to read this and say, I should have had more patience. Okay. But patience has a point where it stops being a virtue and starts being avoidance. I'd hit that point somewhere around the time I was planning a second proposal instead of having an honest conversation about why the first one got turned down. I did this the way I knew how to do it, and I'd have done most of it again. What I wouldn't do again is spend a year pretending the silence was fine. What I know about myself now is that I'm not someone's safe bet. I'm not a placeholder or a backup plan or a holding pattern until something better comes along. I'm not going to wait in a relationship for years, hoping somebody eventually decides I'm worth committing to. She had 4 years and 2 real honest attempts to say yes. She didn't. The panic yes at the end, the one she pulled out the second she thought I was walking away for good. That wasn't an answer. That was fear, and fear doesn't build anything. I made the right call. It took a while to feel that clearly, but I do. Still figuring out what comes next, but I'm moving. That's enough for right now. What would you have done after that first no on the beach? Stayed or walked? Look, I know some people are going to say he should have been more patient. She wasn't cheating. She wasn't cruel. She just couldn't commit. But not ready isn't automatically innocent when it shows up twice in a row with no explanation. When the only yes she had came out the moment she thought she was losing him. That's not love deciding to show up late. That's fear. A panic yes from someone who went silent when asked if she was even sure about him is not a yes worth holding. Walking away from that isn't dramatic or immature. It's the bare minimum of self-respect with your dignity still attached. Drop your take in the comments. Was he wrong to leave? And subscribe so you don't miss the next one.